I want to start this off with a question. Who here in this room has had the experience, either themselves or through their own team, you build a design, you think it's well documented, you think you've considered accessibility, and then you ship it off to development. It's being built, and in the production environment, you figure out, oh, you have more accessibility barriers than you think, and that there are actually real barriers for people with disabilities. Can you raise your hand if that has happened to you? All right, half of the room. Fair. Then we're definitely in the right space. So today, I want to share with you why this happens. And the main reason why this intent between the design and implementation happens is because most things that make or break accessibility experience are often invisible in most design workflows. And I want to show you how annotations could potentially change that, and maybe even influence how your team approaches and thinks of accessibility. Why do I know this? I've been working as an accessibility consultant for the last few years, and my primary objective is helping companies increase their accessibility maturity, not just as a one-time thing, but really through the whole process, creating a strategy so that accessibility is really embedded as a cultural element in the organization. And what I've noticed is working with different teams, you quickly find out that this mismatch is not random. It's actually just a symptom of where people are in their accessibility journey. And to understand that, we need to talk about the two approaches to handling accessibility. One of them is obviously the reactive approach, and one of them is the proactive approach. And in the reactive approach, when we look at a classic product lifecycle process, we can clearly tell that we find accessibility issues quite late in our journey. So they usually either happen completely in production, they may happen a lot in testing, maybe even in development, but usually very, very late due to a lack of quality assurance, or maybe because we work with other teams that are not as advanced in their accessibility knowledge, which is very normal in the accessibility journey. Now, however, when we talk about reactive accessibility, we usually have to consider the business impacts about this as well. Because if we keep doing this approach or rely on later discovery of accessibility issues, we do run into the case of rework, where we have to rework requirements, potentially even design development. And yeah, we also open ourselves up to more legal exposure. We have an impact on our brand image. So anything that users keep noticing in our product that is inaccessible, at some point, if they keep noticing major issues, they will feel not important to you. And they'll feel that their experience is not present. So they may just take their business elsewhere. However, this reactive approach is also not just about losing time and losing money for the business. It also impacts your team culture. And team culture in a sense of we have the case that if you keep finding issues later on, there's going to be a lot of team frustration happening. It's this frustration of constantly having to play catch-up, where you have the knowledge from the beginning that no matter what you build, people are still going to struggle to use what is going to be built afterwards. There's going to be technical debt that's going to occur because all of these tickets will eventually land in a backlog. This backlog is going to grow, which means the motivation to continue doing this is just going to decrease. And we're also going to run into the case of a feature impact, because at one point we need to pull in those accessibility tickets, which means other things have to go out. And while this is obviously a part of agile development, there's going to come a point where there's going to be pushback. And there's going to come a point where people will see accessibility as a blocker to more exciting functionality. And that's something that we want to prevent. And we can definitely do better than being in this reactive cycle. So instead of playing catch-up, we can document these accessibility decisions early on. And early on means where they cost the least to our whole process and also to our whole motivation, which is in design. As designers, we have so much impact in accessibility and accessible experiences. And this is where accessibility annotations come in. They're this invisible bridge between requirements, which are gonna make these invisible requirements more visible. And these little notes about how something functions can really share and improve understanding in the team. Now, don't get me wrong, they will eliminate a lot of issues, but we're not gonna eliminate every single issue we find in production. That's not reasonable, it's not feasible, but it is gonna reduce a majority of it. But which issues are we actually gonna cover with annotations? And I know many of you will probably be familiar with these common issues, but I still wanna do a quick refresh, because we need to understand what is going wrong to really see where annotations can have the most impact. And based on the WebAIM 1 million yearly study that is being done on the most common accessibility issues on the web, and my own personal experience auditing products, I've brought with me these 6 examples. We're obviously going to talk about very briefly about contrast. We have missing text for images, empty links and buttons, a lack of semantic heading markup, missing keyboard navigation, and that dynamic content is not announced. And the beauty about all of these common issues here is that they can be prevented with the right information at the right time. Now, let's start with the fundamentals. I know contrast is a very basic accessibility concept, and it is quite basic. But issues can still occur if your colors are not documented well, especially if you have different outputs in different teams. Social media, marketing, maybe even internal infographics, internal research reports. All of this can become inaccessible at one point if your colors are not documented well. And using a contrast grid, which basically visualizes which colors can be used based on their contrast to each other, helps you make it more visible why certain colors cannot be used. And it also is the first entry point to a more accessibility-led experience inside the company. There are many tools you can use to do that, but I still think it's a very nice entry point to annotation as a tool. If we move forward towards photography, one of the most common issues in auditing is you have an About Us page, and under every image, the person's name appears. We have 3 cases that usually come up in auditing. Either the alt text for this image is going to be the exact same thing as the text below. We will have no alt text, but the image is still going to be present for anyone using assistive technologies, or the image is going to be hidden. Neither of these 3 cases is accessible, because we will lose visual information for people with disabilities. Now, what we can do with annotations in this case is that we communicate when and when not an image should be hidden. So by adding just a simple note with a tiny annotation like alt text and then including the alt text, we can already prevent one of these issues up front. Now, you may have the case, though, that you have a dedicated content management team. So the design team is not really in charge of providing alternative text, and that's perfectly fine. But what we can do to ensure this alt text is not lost, we can still share with development and with everyone on the team that this image is not decorative. So we just say not decorative, the alternative text is going to be provided by someone else. This ensures this is not missed, even if we're not directly responsible for it. And this works the other way around as well. If we want an image to be hidden, which as a very classic case, a clickable card element where the link text wraps around the whole element, in these cases, the image is decorative, and we need to ensure this is also hidden in development. And by annotating that, we can ensure the end result is the behavior that we actually want. But labeling also goes beyond just static content. We also want to label dynamic elements. And even if we think our design is super clear to everyone, there is still gonna be the point where annotations can help you further prove the case. Now, in the case of an e-commerce site, we may have a badge that communicates how many items are in the cart, or we just have a price next to the badge that keeps updating. What happens quite often, even if it seems very simple, is that we end up with a button announcement or with icon underline shopping cart 24x24, which is obviously going to be the icon name, but it still doesn't really tell you what this button does. And in these cases, even though we think everyone knows that this opens a shopping cart, and maybe we already mentioned it opens a shopping cart, we still need to provide a very, very clear label required for acceptance criteria. So we just add label, or we call it accessible name, and share this directly in the Figma file. This accessible text helps us to communicate even the invisible button text that's going to be announced for people who use assistive technologies. We can use the same concept to extend and further provide context. For example, if you have buttons that multiple buttons that are called the same across your design, for example, an add button, a change button, and if you want to improve the accessibility even further, you ensure that invisible text is added to this button. You don't have to tell the developers what error label they should be using. It's up to them. But what we can do is we include a variable that tells them, no matter what happens, in this case, the button should be announced as add product name, or change and then the username. This provides contextual relevance and ensures we do more than just compliance. Now, these are more of the basic annotations that we can do. Let's look a bit into detail what else we can do for annotation purposes. Of course, at some point, we're going to cover headings. Now, the point with annotating headings is we communicate what is a heading, but more importantly, we use it to annotate what isn't a heading. Because we all know something that looks like a heading may not even act as a semantic heading. So visual semantic is not the same as actual code semantic in this case. Because in this case, the short event node at the bottom is bold, and it prefixes a ticket link. So it could make sense to make it a heading, but in our case, it's an even better purpose to be used as a list item. And that's the nice thing about headings. When we annotate them, we ensure we have a heading tree, and we can then look at just the headings and evaluate, is the website, software, app, whatever, understandable by headings alone. Dynamic content, in comparison, uses a lot of invisible elements. So anything that we use to communicate changes on content areas, they could be invisible, they could be visible. In the case of invisible content changes, we have this example of a search. In a search, especially when it's a search that filters content underneath, the content changes. But for anyone who's using a screen reader or any other assistive technology tool, they won't get informed that results are already available. So in this case, we want to provide an accessibility annotation that shares what should happen for a specific user group. So in our case, we would then annotate as screen reader only content. So while the user is typing, communicate the status X results found. This ensures that invisible changes are not lost in the final product. It also makes it clear that we value and consider any user by annotating and making this visible. We can use the same practice if a visible text changes. Whatever that is, a toast message that appears, or maybe a success bar, doesn't matter. We can still use this when visible text changes. In the case here, we have a ticketing system. Whenever I change my amount, I want users to be informed what the change resulted in. So in our case, I would announce that 5 tickets were selected for a certain monetary value, and I keep updating that whenever they change their input. This ensures we have both visual communication, but also an invisible communication for anyone else. And that leaves me with my final or favorite way of using annotations, which is in complex interactions. So annotations are really the point of where more complex interactions can really help you bring out the best in annotations. And one of them is keyboard order. Now, in a keyboard focus order, we as designers are in charge of managing where the focus goes, how the focus appears, and where's the next logical element to place focus. And it's quite common that if we take this upload form here, as soon as I upload my CV, the original button trigger is removed and a new element appears. If this is not documented well, what ends up happening is that the user would have to start from the top of the page again because the focus is lost. And we as designers need to tell everyone on the team where the focus behavior should go next. In our case, we can do this by annotating the elements in 1, 2, 3, or in a certain order. And for every single element, we then communicate what is happening in that area. So for us, it would mean the focus is on the upload button, and in the second step, on upload completion, the focus must be set on the X button, or on the trash delete button here, because it's the next logical element for the user to continue from there. And the cool thing about annotations, especially keyboard annotations here, is you don't have to wait for the final product. You can use them in wireframes. And for keyboard patterns, this is super essential, because you can use keyboard patterns that deviate from the norm, or when you have multiple options available in how you can introduce a keyboard pattern. But you're not really sure which of them feels the best, and also which of them feels the most natural. So what you can do then is use it in addition to a keyboard prototype in Figma, annotate just the keyboard elements, maybe even the screen reader elements, and run it through in your design review. What this does, it helps you communicate your concepts by making multiple user groups visible. And you also make it easier for people who are still new to assistive technologies, so they can understand what you're actually trying to explain. Because keyboard functionality is not always an easy concept to grasp, especially if you're new to it. So making sure you have them in the wireframe puts them at a different level, and you can always reference back to that in the end. And just for the sake of mentioning it, especially if you're working in the mobile area, don't forget about screen reader only content or summarizing information. Anything that you present visually must be communicated contextually as well. Let's take this example of a travel information where we both show the length and duration of a certain public transport. In mobile applications, it's super important to group content and to provide a new label for that content. We can use the same thing for desktop as well, but it's very commonly used in mobile applications. In this example here, if I don't annotate anything and don't share how it should be used to the developers, we end up that the user has to go through every single element on the screen and hope that they make the connection that U1 and S12 is the public transport. We also don't really know how it's going to be implemented. Is the on time going to be announced after the time or after S12? So in this case, what we can do instead is, if we want a very specific arrangement of announcement for an element, especially if it's static, we can just provide screen reader only content in the annotation file. In our case, that would be we communicate the context and say from 2040 until 2057, from Vienna Hauptbahnhof to Vienna Airport, with U1 and S12, duration 17 minutes, on time. This helps us make it more visible what's essentially going to be announced later on in the final product. Now, you've seen multiple variants of how you can actually use annotations. The important part, or the specific part about annotations, is you just want to make accessibility decision visible on day one. Even if they seem super obvious to you, and yes, they may seem super obvious to you, but that's exactly the point. You can't guarantee everyone will have the same knowledge, especially if you work with external providers. Even in your own team, no one is going to have the same understanding. So having these annotations in place really helps you push that knowledge and also ensure the end result is clear for everyone on the team. From what you've seen here, if you decide to use them in your design files, just keep in mind that the most important rules about annotation, which is you need to make them visually distinct and easy to access. It can't lie in a different file than your design handoff, because that's just gonna be ignored in the end. You've seen so many different examples. Just pick what feels best to you, and make them impossible to ignore. The consistency in team adoption matters so much more than which format you actually end up choosing. You could do this through plugins, you could do this in project documentation files, maybe in Figma directly. I would just recommend to do it directly underneath the handoff element so that both of them can be reviewed at the same time. Just find something that works for you. You could decide to annotate them per component. It could look like something like this, where you write a single note on the component and then list out every single step. You could insert them directly into the component just by tagging them. That might get convoluted at some point, but it's still whatever works for you, honestly. It could also be that you rather put them on page level. That could look like something like this, where on every single page template or feature quality, doesn't matter, you write out every single note just on the screen. It may also be that in the end, you only want to focus on one element. That could be just headings, just focus order, or just labeling. So you just remove everything else and keep the context on one element. It doesn't matter what you do and how you introduce it. It's really about picking an approach and sticking with that. The end result should be that accessibility is just staring in your face whenever a design file is opened for handoff. Because only then can you really benefit from annotation quality. Because annotations do more than just document things, at least in my opinion. Because annotations distribute knowledge. As I was saying, you have so many different knowledge levels in your team. Annotations can really help you close knowledge gaps and improve collaboration. You have less guesswork. So instead of assumptions, you have very clear acceptance criteria. You have clarity for all. You reduce back and forth between teams. Oh, what should be the label for this element? Just because it's already clear from the beginning. And you can always come back for reference. A very nice point, I think, as well, is it shares cultural value. By having annotations in place, if new designers join your teams, if new stakeholders join your team, they already know that inclusion matters here. It's integral how you work, and it already shows them what is expected of them in the future. It makes your statement and what the company values way more transparent. And it also makes it easier to spot gaps. Because in design reviews, they highlight accessibility commitment. And if the design intent is already clear here, it starts conversations. You can start questioning things, because it's very clear what you meant, but let's talk about it. So it's easier to spot accessibility failures, or mistakes in this case, earlier on through having them in a design review. And last but not least, I think they can also build empathy. I say think because, of course, there is no guarantee. But if you annotate that a certain button needs a specific label for a user group, you make a certain user group visible to other stakeholders. And maybe they haven't thought of that user group before. And having these annotations in place can really help you push them towards thinking about them, or at least getting them started to think about it. And personally, I think the only way to accomplish this reasonable and sustainable in your process is by changing your process. So add has accessibility annotations to your definition of done. Make it a quality gate and ensure it's a constant reminder in your team. It really pushes your accessibility strategy further because everyone is reminded of it, and they also need to fulfill it to get the element to the next stage. Of course, you can define how this element or how this criteria looks like, but I think it's a nice essential to really improving your process. Now, you might be thinking, this sounds like a lot of extra work, Nina. What are you doing? And honestly, you would be right. Like, if you were to annotate everything at once, 100%, you would create more work than it actually does. You will lose its impact, you will lose buy-in from project managers, because they don't see the value in it, they just see you wasting time on annotations. So the important part about this is be strategic. Choose things that are high impact, like common mistake your team makes, and anything that creates high confusion. Annotate that first and see what happens. The point is not to create perfect annotations from the beginning. It's really about picking what makes your team work better. And you do that by starting small. First, ask yourself what you know about accessibility annotation, and then ask your team what they do know and what they don't know, and then try to find a common ground. Personally, I think the best way to start is just button labels, because we know what a certain button should be doing. Then start with headings. Of course, it requires accessibility knowledge, but still very nice concept to understand how people navigate by just looking at a heading level. And then include alt text or images, iconography, hidden elements. Keyboard and screen reader only content is a more advanced criteria, but in the end, you're also going to get there. So let's sum everything up today. Annotations aren't just a documentation tool. They can be signals that inclusion matters in your company, especially when people keep seeing the design. They decrease frustration in what you build, because everyone knows what should be built. Everyone knows what should be happening. It boosts understanding of how certain things work, how other just boosts understanding of how things work and how other companies are doing it. It starts conversations, because things that we thought were obvious are actually obvious now. And we can really question if people navigating with other assistive technology tools have the same experience as someone who's using a mouse, for example. So it's really about evaluating these two experiences and making it more visible. As a final note, though, accessibility won't solve all of your accessibility problems. That's not their point. Like, you still need a solid strategy, you need quality gates, you need knowledge. However, they can be one tool to get you there. So they can be one tool to further strengthen your strategy and make your process and quality better. So my task for you today is pick something invisible in your current design process. Figure out what's the most common mistake your team makes, and try to make it visible through accessibility annotations. That could be heading levels, it could be alternative text, could be labeling, could be keyboard, doesn't matter. Pick something and try to implement that in your design handoffs. See what happens, because the goal is and should be to make accessibility impossible to ignore. And that starts by making it visible. So my question is, what are you going to make visible this week? Thank you.